The Marine General's son had been in a coma for 6 months. The doctors had already chosen the hour they would let him die. But seconds before the ventilator came off, a rookie nurse saw something no one else in that room was trained to recognize. If you've ever stood beside a hospital bed listening to machines do the breathing, while your heart begged for one more sign, this story is going to hit hard. Because this isn't just about medicine. It's about instinct, battlefield memory, buried trauma, and the terrifying moment when a father realizes his son may not have been gone at all. What happened inside that ICU changed everyone who witnessed it, and the deeper truth behind it was even darker than the coma itself. Stay with me to the end then, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. And that was the part no one in that room could explain. Because a tear should not have fallen from the face of a boy, medicine had already counted as gone. Blackstone Medical Center sat on the northern edge of Colorado Springs like a fortress made of glass and money. By day, sunlight caught the steel ribs of the building and made the whole place look clean enough to erase suffering. By night, especially in the private critical care wing on the 7th floor, the light turned cold and selective. It touched chrome rails, polished floors, and sealed doors. It left grief in the shadows. ICU 7 had become its own small country over the last 6 months. Nurses lowered their voices when they passed it. Residents checked the chart before they stepped inside, as if the words printed there might change depending on who was reading. Security treated the hallway outside the room with the kind of respect usually reserved for military funerals and visiting heads of state. 2 Marines in dress uniform rotated outside the door in 12-hour shifts. They stood, straight hands, folded faces, blank boots, planted on the waxed floor, like the hallway itself had been ordered not to breathe too loudly. Inside the room lay the reason. Eli Crow was 18 years old. He had his father's dark hair, though now it stayed flattened against the pillow, and his mother's narrower face, though most of the softness had been stolen by stillness. The monitors kept count around him. Oxygen saturation, heart rhythm, blood pressure, ventilator settings. Numbers rising and falling in soft electronic colors that had long since replaced sunrise and sunset as the room's only true sense of time. The first thing anyone noticed about him was what he was wearing. Not a gown. Not the thin, open-backed fabric hospitals preferred for convenience and access. Eli wore a burgundy university sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. The sweatshirt had been washed more times than the rest of the staff could guess, but Nathan Crow made sure it was replaced with an identical one every few days. Same color, same fit, same ordinary clothes a living boy would have worn to sit on a couch and complain about homework or cold weather. When a charge nurse had tried gently to explain policy during the first week, Nathan had looked at her with the calm expression of a man who had once commanded artillery under fire and said, "My son is not a body waiting for permission to be human." No one raised the subject again. Each morning before dawn, Nathan arrived at the hospital alone. No aide. No driver waiting with a coffee. No military theater. He came through the employee entrance in a dark coat and old leather gloves, took the elevator to 7, nodded once to the Marines outside ICU 7, and stepped inside like a man reporting to a post no one else could cover for him. He always took the same chair at Eli's bedside. He always placed one hand on the bed rail before he sat down, and then he talked. Not in speeches, not in final words meant to be remembered. Nathan Crow spoke to his son the way fathers do when they think no one important is listening. He read weather reports off his phone and described the snow line in the mountains west of town. He complained about the traffic around Academy Boulevard. He told Eli the Broncos were still disappointing people and that some things apparently could survive any collapse. On days when his voice grew too rough to keep up the shape of conversation, he opened a book and read aloud anyway. Sometimes he read military history because it was familiar territory for both of them. Sometimes he read old adventure novels Eli had loved when he was 12. Once, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, when the whole wing smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee, He spent 20 minutes reading comments from a forum about custom gaming computers, even though he clearly understood only half of what he was saying. He read every line like it mattered. The staff told themselves this was for the father, not the son. A ritual, a coping mechanism. The kind of thing families do when love has nowhere practical left to go. Dr. Ross Halpern believed that more than anyone. Halpern was the lead neurologist assigned to Eli's case, and a man who had built a career on refusing to let emotion contaminate interpretation. He was not cruel. People who did not know him often made that mistake because his voice stayed level, even when he delivered terrible news, and because he believed false hope was one of the most expensive injuries medicine could inflict. He had spent 23 years watching families cling to microscopic signs interpreting involuntary reflexes as recognition and meaningless fluctuations as rescue. He understood the anatomy of hope well enough to distrust it. So, when he first met Nathan Crowe after the accident, Halpern had chosen his words with care. The vehicle had gone off Highway 24 just west of Woodland Park on a narrow mountain stretch lined with guardrails and frozen scrub. According to the initial report, Eli's brakes failed on a descent just after dusk. The SUV crossed a shoulder of gravel-clipped steel, then spun hard enough to collapse the driver's side frame before coming to rest against rock. Search and rescue needed 40 minutes to extract him. Flight medics noted severe cranial trauma at the scene. Neurosurgery stabilized what could be stabilized. The swelling did what it wanted anyway. By the time Nathan arrived at Blackstone, still wearing the same field jacket he had been handed on the tarmac, Halpern already had the scans. He had seen the damage. He had seen the absence. And he had recognized the shape of a long war no one in that waiting room could win by wanting harder. But Nathan Crowe had looked at those scans only once. After that, he looked at his son. That difference became the quiet line dividing the father from the doctors for the next 6 months. At first, Blackstone treated Eli's case like any high-profile trauma admission. The room filled with consultations, specialists' scan reviews, whispered hallway conferences updates repeated in careful phrases. Then the weeks stacked into months and routine took over. The drama drained away from the chart and hardened into terms everyone could use without feeling anything. Non-responsive. No meaningful cortical activity. No measurable improvement. Severe traumatic brain injury. Poor prognosis. Family not accepting withdrawal of life support. The words kept the staff moving. They made the impossible manageable. But ICU nurses lived closer to bodies than phrases did, and bodies sometimes complicated language. Clare Bennett had been on the floor only 19 days when she was first assigned to Eli Crowe. Most people on the unit remembered her arrival because they had expected something else. A rookie transfer into critical care was usually loud in one of two directions. Either too eager to prove they belonged, or so visibly nervous that everyone else had to compensate around them. Clare was neither. She came onto the floor with a quiet face, a neat bun, an unadorned badge clipped to navy scrubs, and a habit of scanning every room before she entered it as if measuring exits' lines of sight and trouble. She did not introduce herself with stories. She did not ask for special treatment. She learned the charting system faster than anyone expected, and moved through emergency calls with an economy that made veteran nurses stop what they were doing and watch. She had the stillness of someone who had once learned that panic wasted blood. No one knew much else. Her personnel file mentioned prior military service and trauma experience. It did not mention the smell of dust after mortar strikes or the fact that she slept lightly enough to hear the change in a ventilator before an alarm sounded, or that her hands stayed steady, not because she had never been afraid, but because she had practiced doing difficult things while afraid for a very long time. The first time Clare entered ICU 7, she noticed what everyone noticed. The private room, the Marine guards, the father in the chair, the patient who looked too young to have become an institution. The second time she entered, she noticed things other people had stopped looking at. The ventilator delivered each breath on schedule, but not every exhale matched the machine with perfect passivity. Once every few cycles, there was the faintest suggestion of resistance, almost too small to call effort, more like the echo of effort. A hesitation in the pressure curve. A whisper of a body that had not completely forgotten it, once knew how to breathe on its own. Claire adjusted the humidification setting and said nothing. 2 hours later, she was back to check his lines and saw something else. Nathan was reading aloud from a paperback with cracked corners. Eli lay motionless, as always. Yet, 10 seconds after Nathan said you hated this chapter when you were 13, the heart rate rose by 2 beats and settled again. Artifact, maybe. Noise, maybe. Still, she logged the time in her mind. The next morning, she found the same thing during passive range of motion. Eli's left hand relaxed differently after she extended the fingers. Not enough to count as voluntary movement. Not enough to chart, but not identical either. She set the hand back on the blanket and watched it for another 10 seconds longer than protocol required. The ICU had no use for intuition that could not survive documentation. Claire knew that. She also knew bodies sometimes started telling the truth before machines did. She kept watching. On her 4th shift with Eli's case, Nathan spoke for the first time directly to her. She was checking the central line when he said, "You are new." It was not a question. His voice carried the dry steadiness of a man whose emotions had been packed into ammunition crates and stacked somewhere out of reach. Claire glanced up. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a second, not in suspicion, but in assessment. Marines spent their lives reading bearing, posture, economy, where a person's attention sat when they thought no one important was looking. "You prior service?" "Yes, sir." "Corpsman." Claire finished securing the tape before she answered. "Yes, sir." Nathan gave one slow nod. Not gratitude, not approval. Recognition. That was all. But after that, when Claire came into the room, he watched her the way professionals watch one another in unfamiliar terrain. The rest of the staff still saw a quiet nurse with unusually good instincts. Nathan saw discipline. He saw someone who checked corners before focusing on equipment. Someone who kept her back clear of the door. Someone who never wasted motion. He had spent too much of his life around combat veterans not to recognize what calm looked like after it had been paid for. Dr. Halpern noticed the same competence and interpreted it differently. To him, Claire's reserve was an asset so long as it stayed inside its lane. She followed orders, she documented well, she did not grandstand. Good. The floor had enough personalities already. Then, 3 mornings before the planned extubation discussion, Claire lingered by Eli's monitor after a routine neuro check and frowned. Halpern happened to be in the room reviewing lab updates. "What is it?" he asked. Claire kept her eyes on the waveform, his respiratory pattern. Halpern stepped closer. "What about it?" "It is not fully passive." He looked at the screen for 3 seconds, then 6, then straightened. "It is ventilator-driven." Claire did not move, mostly. Halpern folded the tablet against his chest. "Nurse Bennett, this case has had no meaningful neurological change in 6 months." "I know." "Then you also know severe injury produces noise. Tiny fluctuations happen." Claire nodded once. "Yes, doctor." Something about her tone bothered him. Not defiance. Worse. Open possibility. "There are no maybe signs here," Halpern said. "Not ones that matter." Claire turned from the monitor and went back to her charting. Understood, but she did not stop watching. That evening, while a winter storm brushed the windows with dry, rattling sleet, Director Eleanor Pike made her monthly appearance on the unit. She moved through the private wing the way administrators often did, dressed too elegantly for the fluorescent light offering concern in carefully measured portions. Blackstone valued discretion, and Nathan Crow's presence in the building meant donors, reporters, military contacts, and hospital lawyers all hovered somewhere just outside the frame. Pike paused at ICU. 7 watched Nathan sitting at Eli's bedside and lowered her voice to Halpern. "Has there been any shift?" "Number." And General Crow, Halpern, gave the smallest shrug, the same. Pike's expression tightened by a degree no one would have noticed without reason to look for it. We cannot carry an indefinite public spectacle if this becomes a story. Halpern glanced at her. He is not making it one. No, Pike said, but miracles are bad for policy. Claire heard that from the medication station down the hall and said nothing. She simply signed out her next dose, slid the drawer shut, and went back into the room where the administrator's language did not belong. Miracles were for people with no charts to protect. That much was true. What Claire dealt in was smaller and more dangerous. Possibility. Over the following week, the private ICU room accumulated winter in subtle ways. Nathan's gloves sat damp on the windowsill each morning after he came in from the dark parking structure. The radiator under the far window clicked twice before settling into heat. Nurses entered with red cheeks from the cold and left with that hospital pallor that came from too much artificial light. Inside the room, Eli remained the fixed point around which everything turned. Claire learned details from observation before anyone told her directly. Eli liked old science fiction paperbacks because Nathan kept bringing worn copies and reading them aloud. He had once been an athlete because his shoulders still carried remnants of muscle under the wasting that bed rest could not yet fully erase. He had built computers because Nathan complained to him once, half smiling, that there were too many cables behind the desk at home, and only Eli ever knew what any of them did. He had a healing scar at the base of his hairline, and a small faded mark on his right forearm that looked like the remains of a childhood fracture. Life lingered in traces. Then, one afternoon, while changing an IV bag, Claire noticed a photograph tucked into the edge of the bedside table drawer. It had slid halfway out, likely from one of Nathan's earlier visits. She did not pick it up at first. Professional boundaries mattered, but the corner bent toward the floor, and when she reached to save it from dropping, she saw the image. Nathan, in civilian clothes, younger by maybe 10 years, squinting into bright mountain sun. Beside him stood Eli at 14 or 15, taller than expected, grinning with the loose confidence of a boy not yet old enough to fear how easily life could split in two. Both of them wore hiking packs. Behind them rose a ridgeline washed gold by evening light. A normal day. Claire set the photo back carefully. When Nathan returned from speaking with a specialist in the hall, he saw where she had placed it. He liked the incline, he said. Claire glanced at the photo again. That was Manitou. Nathan nodded. He used to race me up the first half just to watch me pretend I was not tired. There was a pause. Not awkward, human. He seemed stubborn, Claire said. For the first time since she had met him, something close to warmth moved through Nathan's face. Very. He looked at Eli then, and the expression vanished under the weight of 6 months. His mother used to say he never did anything halfway. If he got interested in something, the whole house had to live with it. What kind of things? Programming. Drones for a while. Competitive swimming when he was younger. A guitar he never learned properly. Nathan gave a quiet exhale that might once have been a laugh. He was good at everything he did not need permission to do. Claire adjusted the blanket near Eli's wrist. And lately, Nathan's eyes shifted to her. He caught the question beneath the question. Lately he was distracted. How? I do not know. The answer came too quickly for a man like Nathan. That told Claire he had been asking himself the same thing and finding only fragments. He was up late, Nathan said after a moment. On his computer, on calls he would end when I walked in. He asked me strange things. What kind of strange things? Nathan looked toward the dark window. Colorado Springs reflected there with scattered light and no answers. Military freight routes. Overseas supply networks. How systems verify shipment integrity. Questions an 18-year-old should not even know how to frame. Claire did not react outwardly, but something in her attention sharpened. And you asked, why? Yes. What did he say? Nathan's mouth hardened. That it was for a side project. You believed him. I wanted to. That line stayed in the air between them. Wanted to, not did. Claire returned to her charting, but she carried the information with her through the rest of the shift. Trauma cases often came with chaos around the edges: family secrets, fights, addictions, private disasters. But there was a different kind of tension in the Crow case. It had less to do with shame than containment. Marines outside the door. Administrators measuring optics. A father who was clearly not telling every story he knew. A boy with unexplained technical curiosity aimed at military systems just before a fatal brake failure on a mountain road. Nothing connected cleanly yet. Still, the room no longer felt like a simple tragedy. Late that night, after most of the floor had dimmed into low light and monitor glow, Claire was covering Eli's room, while the assigned nurse handled another patient in respiratory distress. Nathan had gone home for the first time in 48 hours, after being practically ordered out by a senior charge nurse who threatened to call his office herself if he refused to sleep. Claire was alone with Eli when the artifact happened again. She was not even looking at the respiratory trace at first. She was flushing a line and glancing over the rhythm strip out of habit when she saw the smallest spike in heart rate, then a faint alteration in the breathing curve. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Most people would have missed it. Some would have seen it and dismissed it. Claire froze syringe still in hand. "Eli," she said quietly. No response. She stepped closer to the bed. The room hummed softly. Ventilator. IV pump. Distant ice machine in the hallway. Snow tapping against the glass. She looked at his face. The lids stayed closed. The mouth remained slack around the tube. Nothing visible changed. But Claire had heard something else, too. Not sound exactly. Rhythm. The kind of pause she had learned to recognize in field tents and transport birds when a wounded body fought the machine before surrendering to it again. She stood there for almost a full minute, eyes on the monitor, until the pattern disappeared and the room became ordinary once more. Then she charted nothing, because there was nothing she could defend on paper. The next morning, Halpern entered the room carrying the same careful expression Claire had begun to hate. Not because it was cold, but because it meant he had organized grief into sentences again. Nathan stood from the bedside chair before the doctor even spoke. "General Halpern said I would like to review where we are." Nathan did not sit back down. The conversation that followed was one Blackstone had rehearsed for weeks. Clinical status. No meaningful recovery. Extended dependence on full support. Recommendation to consider withdrawal. Language scrubbed clean of violence while still pointing toward the same cliff. Claire checked an infusion pump near the far wall and kept her face neutral. Nathan listened in silence. He had become very good at that. Men at his rank often learned to interrupt direct challenge. Grief had carved the authority out of his voice and replaced it with endurance. When Halpern finished, Nathan looked at Eli for several long seconds before answering. "I need time." "We will give you time," Halpern said. But time had already become the enemy in that room. Everyone felt it. Over the next 2 days, the atmosphere on the unit changed in subtle professional ways that had nothing to do with open conversation. Respiratory therapy confirmed schedules. Pharmacy reviewed medications with an eye toward discontinuation protocols. Chaplain services were notified but not yet called. A social worker left a card at the nurses' station and never stepped inside. Claire saw it all. She also saw the changes nobody was naming. The pressure curve shifting again. The tiny increase in pulse after Nathan spoke close to Eli's ear. The left hand relaxing differently from the right. And once, while suctioning the smallest tightening along Eli's jaw as if some buried part of him hated the intrusion enough to remember discomfort. On the final morning, before the doctor with the death paperwork, and the gentle voice came in, Claire entered ICU 7, while darkness still clung to the mountains. Nathan was already there. He looked worse than usual, not weaker, harder. Like he had spent the entire night negotiating with a reality that refused to be negotiated with. "You did not go home," Claire said quietly. "Number." He did not offer more, and she did not ask. The room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. Snow had cleared, leaving the world outside the window sharpened and pale. Far off, the ridgeline behind the city was beginning to gather the first cold hint of dawn. Nathan stood beside the bed and rested his hand over Eli's. He hated hospitals, he said after a while. Claire checked the monitor leads. Most people do. He was 8 when he broke his arm skiing. They wanted to keep him overnight because the swelling was bad. Nathan's voice stayed on the edge of memory, not quite in the room. He tried to bargain with the orthopedic surgeon. Offered him a new gaming console if he would sign the discharge papers. Claire glanced at him. Did it work? For 30 seconds, I think the man considered it. The silence that followed was softer than the others had been. Then Nathan said, "You watch him differently." Claire did not pretend not to understand. "Yes, sir." "Why?" She looked at Eli before answering. "Because some patients are only quiet, they are not absent." Nathan absorbed that without moving. "Do you believe that about my son?" Claire chose truth over reassurance. "I believe I have seen enough not to stop looking." For the first time in months, perhaps, Nathan let himself turn fully toward another human being inside that room. Not a doctor, not an administrator, not a subordinate, a witness. His voice dropped. "If there is anything left to try, I need to know before they ask me again." Claire looked at the monitor, then at Eli's face, then back at Nathan. Questions moved through her mind with military clarity. Familiarity. Conditioning. Command response. Patterns learned young enough to embed deeper than fear. She heard the doctor's footsteps approaching in the hallway. She heard the soft shift of the Marines outside the door. And before Halpern entered with his final conversation already prepared, Claire asked the one thing that mattered. "Did your son grow up around Marine command language?" Nathan frowned, caught off guard by the shape of the question. "Since he could walk," he said. "Bases, training field, ceremonies." He heard it his whole life. Claire nodded once as though a lock inside her had just found the right key. "Good," she said. "Then there is one thing I would like to try." "Good," Claire said. "Then there is one thing I would like to try." The room changed the moment she said it. Not loudly. No alarms fired. No one raised a voice. But the air itself tightened as if every machine in ICU 7 had leaned in to listen. Dr. Ross Halpern stepped through the doorway with a tablet in one hand and the look of a man who had come to deliver the same pain for the last time. He stopped just inside the room, reading the expression on Nathan Crow's face before his eyes shifted to Claire. "What thing?" he asked. Claire did not answer him immediately. She was still watching Eli. The ventilator pushed a breath into the boy's lungs. The waveform climbed, held, fell. The room hummed with that cold electronic patience hospitals were built on. Nathan turned from the bed toward her. "Say it." Claire let one beat pass, not for drama, but because words mattered more in rooms like this than people understood. "A recall technique," she said. "Used in severe trauma cases in combat medicine." Halpern's expression hardened at once. "No." Nathan did not look at the doctor. "I wasn't asking you." Halpern stepped closer. "General, with respect, this is not a field tent in a war zone. This is a neurological ICU. Your son has had repeated scans, repeated exams, repeated confirmation of non-meaningful response." Claire's eyes stayed on Eli. "I know. Then you also know there is no accepted protocol for improvised stimulation based on anecdotal trauma response." Claire nodded once. "There isn't." Halpern stared at her. "And yet you're recommending it. I'm asking for 30 seconds. Those words settled into the room with more force than they should have carried. 30 seconds. That was all she was asking for against 6 months of charts scans, consultations, signed findings, and institutional certainty. 30 seconds against a diagnosis written often enough that half the floor had begun treating it like weather. Nathan Crow looked from Claire to his son and back again. "What exactly are you going to do?" he asked. Claire finally turned toward him fully. Her face was calm, but something older than calm lived underneath it. Precision. Memory. A discipline that did not belong to a civilian hospital. I want to try a command response using familiar cadence and targeted nerve stimulation, she said. Nothing invasive, no medication, no changes to support. If there is any buried response left, something conditioned deep enough to survive trauma, it may reach him where normal assessment hasn't. Halpern folded his arms. May is not medicine, no, Claire said, but it is triage. The word landed differently on Nathan than it did on the doctor. He heard not optimism, but procedure under pressure. Limited time, limited certainty. One chance to choose action or regret. Halpern opened his mouth again, but Nathan lifted a hand and the doctor stopped. The general was not in uniform, but command did not need ribbons to be recognized. "Will it hurt him?" Nathan asked. Claire answered without hesitation. "No, sir." "Will it risk destabilizing him?" "No, sir." "Will it cost me more than 30 seconds?" Claire's voice stayed even. "No, sir." Nathan looked at Eli, at the burgundy sweatshirt, at the face that had not answered him in half a year, at the room that had slowly trained everyone in it to expect nothing. Then he said, "Do it." Halpern stepped forward. "General, I strongly advise against allowing a symbolic intervention to create false interpretation in a case like this." Nathan's gaze shifted to him, steady and tired and harder than grief should have allowed. "If my son is leaving this world today," he said, "then 30 seconds will not change that." The doctor held his stare for a moment, then looked away first. Claire set the chart tablet on the counter. She washed her hands, dried them, and moved to the head of the bed with the quiet economy Nathan had noticed from the beginning. No nerves, no performance, no need to prove belief. Only the discipline of someone entering a narrow window where hesitation could ruin timing. She checked the tubing first. Ventilator secure. Endotracheal line in place. IVs patent. Monitoring leads attached. She glanced at the heart rhythm, then at the respiratory waveform, then at Eli's face. His skin was pale under the hospital light. The lashes rested against his cheeks like still brushstrokes. To anyone else, he looked unreachable. Claire leaned in close enough that her shoulder almost brushed the pillow. She placed 2 fingers with deliberate care just below Eli's jaw along the side of his neck, where nerve bundles ran close to the surface. Not pressing hard, not theatrical. A point of contact precise enough to mean she had done this before with consequences attached. Halpern watched with contained skepticism. Nathan stood beside the bed with one hand on the rail. He had gone so still he almost seemed carved from the dimness. Claire lowered her voice and changed it. That was the first thing Nathan noticed. Her tone lost the softness of the ward and became something cleaner, sharper, stripped of comfort. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried the shape of command, given where confusion killed. "Eli Crow," she said. "Listen to my voice." Nothing moved. The ventilator breathed for him again. Claire did not change expression. Her fingers maintained gentle pressure. Her eyes stayed on his face. "Eyes front," she said quietly. A heartbeat passed, then another. Nathan realized he was gripping the bed rail hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Halpern looked at the monitor, then at Claire, then back at the monitor as if trying to catch suggestion in the act of becoming error. Claire went on. "Stay in the fight." The words did not sound poetic in her mouth. They sounded old, practical, worn by use in places where the difference between one more breath and none could depend on what a wounded person's brain recognized beneath shock. Still nothing. Halpern exhaled through his nose. Nurse Bennett enough. Claire ignored him. She leaned half an inch closer to Eli's ear, and when she spoke again, the cadence shifted. More direct. Less like a nurse speaking to a patient, and more like someone reaching through fog to the last intact reflex of discipline. "On my count, you push back. Do you hear me?" Nathan felt something move in his chest then. Not hope. Hope was too fragile a word for what rose inside him. This was older. It was the battlefield instinct that told a commander when a unit had not broken yet, even when every visible sign argued otherwise. Halpern shook his head. "This is meaningless." And then the monitor flickered. It was small. So small, Nathan might have missed it if he had blinked. a subtle jag in one of the lines where there should have been smooth mechanical obedience. Dr. Halpern saw it too. His eyes snapped to the screen. "Artifact," he said immediately, but his voice had changed. Claire did not move. "Eli," she said, still in that hard, low cadence, "you know this voice. You know this command. Breathe with me." Her fingers shifted fractionally along the nerve point. On the bed, Eli's face remained still. For one terrible second, the room seemed ready to fold back into the same certainty it had carried for months. Then a tear formed at the corner of Eli's left eye. Not suddenly. Not in a dramatic rush. It welled slowly clear against the stillness, then spilled and traced a thin line down his temple into the pillow. No one spoke. The tear changed the room before thought could catch up. Nathan Crow stared as if every war he had survived had trained him for this exact moment and still left him unprepared. Halpern stepped toward the monitor. His brows pulled together, then deeper his training, and his eyes entering open conflict. Claire kept one hand at Eli's neck and watched the wave pattern. Another small rise, irregular, faint, not enough to certify anything. Enough to break certainty. Nathan's voice came out rough. "Did you see that?" Halpern did not answer at once. He was already pulling a penlight from his coat pocket. He crossed to the bedside, shone it across Eli's pupils, checked for reactivity, checked again. "A tear can be reflexive," he said, but this time he sounded like he was explaining the possibility to himself. The monitor flickered again. Dr. Maya Torres appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shift in voices. She was the neurology resident on the morning service, young enough to still move with visible urgency and sharp enough not to mistake status for truth. She stepped inside, took one look at the room, and focused on the screen. "What happened?" she asked. Halpern did not look up. Transient anomaly. Claire lifted her eyes from the monitor to Maya for the briefest second. He responded to command stimulus. Halpern straightened. "We do not know that." Claire met his gaze. He changed after command stimulus. Maya moved closer to the screen. The waveform was already settling again, smoothing itself back toward the indifferent rhythm of the machine. But she had seen enough to know no one in the room was imagining the tension. Nathan leaned over his son, Eli. Nothing. Claire removed her fingers from the pressure point and watched the trace flatten back into passivity. There it was, the window closing. She knew that feeling too well. Trauma patients in critical states often answered like drowning men, breaking the surface only long enough to prove they were still there. Again, Nathan said. Halpern looked at him sharply. "General, we cannot repeat an unvalidated maneuver and build a diagnosis on noise." Nathan did not turn from the bed. "You built a diagnosis on silence." That struck harder than he meant it to. The doctor absorbed it without response. Claire glanced once more at the respiratory pattern. The slight mismatch was back there and gone. She understood something then with the kind of certainty that rarely arrived in words. Eli was not answering comfort. He was answering training, familiarity, pressure, something embedded deeper than ordinary language. She moved back into position. Halpern opened his mouth to object, but Maya said quietly, "Let her do it." The room took that in. Halpern turned to his resident. "Excuse me." Maya kept watching the screen. "If it is artifact, we'll know. If it repeats under the same input, then we need data." That was enough to keep the door open. Barely. Claire placed her fingers again below Eli's jaw. Her shoulders squared almost imperceptibly. Nathan had seen Marines prepare to breach with less composure. This time, Claire's voice dropped lower and sharpened further, each word clean as steel. "Eli Crow." Eyes forward. The machines whispered. Push through the noise. The heart monitor gave one altered beep. Nathan took a breath he did not trust himself to release. Claire leaned in close to Eli's ear, and the next words came with the stripped-down authority of a battlefield order that assumed obedience because the alternative was death. "On my count, take the fight. 1, 2, 3. The EEG line twitched harder. Maya stepped closer. "There." Halpern snapped his head toward the screen. The signal stuttered, rose, then settled into a faint but measurable sequence that had not been there a moment earlier. At the same instant, another tear slid down Eli's cheek. Not a reflexive wetness this time. A response with rhythm to it connected to the stimulus as clearly as anything in that room had been connected to him in months. Nathan reached for the bedrail with his free hand to steady himself. Eli, he whispered, and for the first time in half a year the words sounded less like mourning and more like a call across distance. The ventilator pushed its next breath. Halfway through the cycle, the pressure curve shifted. Maya looked up sharply. He's resisting. Halpern stared at the waveform as if it had insulted him personally. No, he muttered. That is not enough. But he was already moving toward the wall phone. He picked it up with abrupt force and dialed the internal emergency line. "This is Halpern in ICU 7, he said. His voice was controlled, but the control was strained, now stretched by the first real uncertainty he had allowed himself in months. "I need full neuro response and portable EEG now. Bring a transport monitor and call respiratory, immediately." He hung up and turned back to the bed. Nathan had not moved. He stood over his son, eyes fixed on Eli's face, every line of his body drawn taut, with the concentration of a man watching a minefield for signs that one path through remained open. Claire stepped back half a pace, not retreating, only clearing space as the room began to wake around them. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. One nurse, then two. Wheels. The metallic rattle of equipment moving too fast over polished tile. The Marines outside the door shifted but did not enter. Their silhouettes remained fixed through the glass sentries at a threshold none of them could influence. Inside the room, Maya Torres took over one side of the bed, with efficient hands checking lead placement, verifying artifact filters, adjusting the monitor gain. "What exactly did you do?" she asked without looking at Claire. Claire kept her gaze on Eli. Command cadence, nerve stimulus, familiar pattern recognition. Maya gave a quick sideways look. "Where did you learn that?" Claire answered with the same quiet she had worn all morning. "Attached to Marine Infantry in Helmand." The name of the province landed with a weight that did not belong to hospital language. Halpern looked at her fully then. Nathan did too. Something subtle shifted in the room. Claire was no longer merely the quiet transfer nurse with good instincts. Context reassembled around her in a new shape. The steadiness, the stillness, the refusal to over-explain. Men and women who had worked in hospitals all their adult lives often developed their own kind of calm. Hers had been forged somewhere harsher. Maya's hands paused for half a second over the leads. "You were a corpsman in Afghanistan." "Yes." The resident nodded once, then went back to the monitor. Whatever questions she had could wait. The data in front of her could not. Respiratory therapy arrived first. Then two more neurologists, one of them gray-haired and sharp-faced, the other younger and already gloved. They rolled in the portable EEG unit and began attaching additional leads with clipped, concentrated silence. No one wasted time on introductions. High-pressure rooms created their own hierarchy. The patient set the pace. The signal set the argument. Halpern filled them in fast. 6 months unresponsive. Prior non-meaningful scans. Final support discussion. Nurse-initiated field command stimulus. Tear response. Pattern change. Possible spontaneous respiratory effort. The older neurologist, Dr. Samuel Vance, frowned at the screen. "Possible," Maya pointed. "We saw 3 event-linked changes." "Linked is a strong word," Halpern said. Vance did not answer. He studied the waveform, then Eli's face, then Claire. "You initiated the stimulus." "Yes, doctor." "What exactly did you say?" Claire repeated the commands without embellishment. Vance listened, then nodded once, an academic gesture hiding real interest. "Do it again. Same cadence, same contact point. We record this run." Halpern shot him a look. "Sam." Vance did not turn. "You asked for neuro response. I am responding." Nathan's eyes shifted to Claire. He did not speak. He did not need to. Permission had already been given. The room narrowed around the bed. Clare moved back to Eli's head. This time, every machine was watching with them. Every eye in the room was fixed either on her hand Eli's face or the unfolding lines on the portable screen. She placed her fingers where they had been before. For a moment, the only sound was the ventilator. Then Clare spoke. "Eli Crow, listen to me." The words cut clean through the mechanical hush. Eyes front. A beat. "Stay with the unit." One of the EEG channels lifted in a faint pulse. Maya leaned closer. "There." Claire's tone sharpened. "You are not done. Breathe when I count. 1, 2, 3. 3 channels rose together. Not dramatically. Not enough to turn a miracle into certainty. But organized. Timed. Responsive. Vance's face changed. Not amazement. Recognition. "Run that again," he said quietly. Clare did. This time Eli's fingers twitched against the sheet. Nathan saw it. So did Maya. Halpern looked from the hand to the screen, his skepticism visibly trying to survive a body of evidence that no longer wanted it. "That could still be reflexive," he said. "Reflexive to repeated verbal input with corresponding cortical activation?" Vance asked, without taking his eyes off the display. Halpern said nothing. The room had passed some invisible line, not into certainty, into pursuit. Nathan bent close to his son, his voice barely above a whisper. "Eli, it's Dad." The trace changed again. Maya's head snapped up. "He's differentiating." Clare stepped aside enough to give Nathan space. "Talk to him." The general swallowed once. Months of restrained grief dragged against his throat, but when he spoke, the words came steady. "Eli, if you hear me squeeze my hand." Nathan slid his hand over his son's. Nothing. Then a minute shift. Not enough to call grip. Enough to call intention. The fingers flexed once beneath Nathan's palm and fell still again. No one in the room moved. Nathan looked as though someone had struck him under the ribs. Maya whispered. That was not random. Halpern's mouth tightened. The word impossible wanted to live somewhere inside him, but facts were already stripping it for parts. Respiratory stepped closer to the vent screen. "He's triggering shallow initiations on top of the set rate." Vance nodded. "Reduce support slightly, just slightly. Watch for fatigue." Halpern turned. "Not until we confirm consistency." "Then confirm it while he's trying," Vance said. The therapist adjusted the settings with careful hands. Every second afterward felt stretched thin enough to tear. The ventilator cycled. Then, before the machine could complete the next breath, Eli's chest made the smallest independent effort. Shallow, incomplete. Real. Maya's lips parted. He initiated. Nathan bowed his head for one fraction of a second, then lifted it again. He was not a man given to visible collapse, but the force of that one breath went through him like artillery. Clare watched Eli's face closely. The body was working now. Not fully, not safely, but fighting. Vance turned to Halpern. "Get this documented now. Full EEG. Repeat arterial gases, no extubation discussion, no withdrawal conversation. Not in this room." Halpern nodded once abrupt and chastened, agreed. A nurse from outside the unit stepped in with the chart update board, then stopped cold when she saw the room. Doctors clustered at the bed. Neuro equipment running. Nathan Crow gripping his son's hand like a line thrown to a drowning man. Clare Bennett standing near the head of the bed with the stillness of someone who had seen the tide turn before and knew better than to celebrate too soon. The nurse backed out without a word. Beyond the glass walls, the hallway had begun to fill. Word traveled fast in hospitals faster when it contradicted paperwork. Residents passed and slowed. 2 respiratory staff who had no reason to linger found reasons. One of the Marines outside the room kept his face expressionless, but his eyes shifted once toward the monitor inside and stayed there longer than protocol demanded. Nathan looked up at Clare then. Truly looked at her as though reclassifying her in his mind the way the room already had. "You've seen this before," he said. Clare did not answer immediately. The sounds of Afghanistan still lived in parts of her that did not respond well to fluorescent light and polished floors. Rotor wash. Blood on canvas. Men shouting through dust. She usually kept those rooms locked, but Nathan had earned plain speech. Once she said. The word was quiet enough that only those nearest the bed heard it. One of ours took blunt trauma during an extraction. He went blank. No response. No tracking. Everybody around him thought he was gone. Nathan held her eyes. What happened? Claire glanced at Eli before answering, as if measuring what part of herself the room truly needed. A senior corpsman got in close. Used command voice and pressure input. Not to wake him up. To reach whatever was still obeying underneath the injury. She took a breath. The Marine came back long enough for us to get him out. Maya looked from Claire to the monitor, absorbing the story into the data now appearing in front of her. Halpern said nothing. Perhaps he was too honest a physician to pretend the origin of the technique mattered less once it had produced measurable response. Vance asked the question clinicians always asked when something improbable entered the room. How long was he unresponsive? Claire's eyes drifted briefly to a place none of them could see. 12 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Vance nodded slowly. This is longer. Yes, and yet you tried it. Claire met his gaze, Baumaise, because he wasn't empty. Silence met that statement, but not disagreement, not anymore. Nathan looked back at Eli. His thumb moved once across the back of his son's hand, a gesture so small and intimate it made the room suddenly feel less clinical than sacred. Eli, he said softly, you do not have to do this alone. The EEG pattern shifted again. Not enough for words. Enough for attention. Maya's voice rose with sudden focus. Look at that, temporal response. Halpern moved beside her. The line was still faint, still fragile, still surrounded by enough silence to make interpretation dangerous. But it was not the flat, meaningless field they had built 6 months of certainty on. It had structure now. Repetition. External relationship. Vance spoke without taking his eyes off the screen. This is not a dead brain. No one answered him because the sentence was too large. Nathan's face lost color, not from fear this time, from the sheer violence of hope returning where it had no right to. Halpern took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, then put them back on. If this is real, he said quietly, more to the room than to any one person, then the initial classification needs complete reevaluation. Maya looked up. How do we miss this for 6 months? No one had an answer that could survive daylight. Claire looked at the respiratory curve. There it was again. The pattern she had noticed from the beginning, only stronger now that the room had stopped talking over it with certainty. Effort hidden beneath support. Fight buried under sedation injury and the assumptions of people who thought absence meant surrender. The hospital director arrived 2 minutes later. Eleanor Pike entered with the controlled speed of someone who already knew enough to be alarmed, and not enough to know whether alarm should be public. She took in the equipment, the number of specialists in the room, Nathan at the bedside, and the expression on Halpern's face. That expression told her more than his words did. Ross, she said. Halpern turned. We are observing organized neurological response in patient Crow. Pike blinked once. Organized. Yes. After 6 months. Yes. Her eyes moved to Claire, then back to Halpern. How? No one answered right away. Vance did it for them. At the moment, Director, I am more interested in whether than how. Pike's gaze lingered on the portable EEG screen. She was not a physician, but administrators learned to read rooms the way soldiers learned to read terrain. This one had become dangerous. Not because someone was dying, because the official story might no longer hold. Nathan did not look at her. No more discussions about ending support. Pike answered carefully, of course not. The words sounded smooth, too smooth. Claire noticed. She noticed that Pike's first instinct was not visible relief, but controlled recalculation. She noticed the way Halpern's shoulders had dropped under the weight of being wrong. She noticed Maya's hunger for explanation and Vance's refusal to let wonder contaminate process. Most of all, she noticed Eli. The twitch at the corner of the eye, the faint change in pulse when Nathan spoke, the way his fingers had not returned to complete stillness after that one brief response. The body was no longer passive, it was listening. "Talk to him again," Claire said. Nathan turned toward her. "About what?" "Anything he knows. Anything familiar. Keep him oriented to your voice." Nathan nodded and bent close. "Eli, it's Dad. You're at Blackstone. Colorado Springs. You're in the ICU, son. Hear me." The EEG line trembled. "There," Maya said. Nathan kept going. "You had an accident. You're safe. You're not alone." Safe. Claire heard the word, and for reasons she could not yet explain, something about it caught. Not wrong, incomplete. She looked toward the foot of the bed where the chart tablet still lay open from earlier. The active screen had timed out, gone black. Beyond it sat the slim accident file Halpern had been carrying when he entered the room. The paperwork on the crash. Brake failure. Mountain road. High-impact trauma. Clean narrative. Too clean, maybe. But there was no room for that thought yet. Not while the boy in the bed was still surfacing. Vance ordered another series of tests. Blood work. Repeat imaging. Arterial gas analysis. Lower sedation review. Documented response intervals. The room shifted from death watch to active case management so abruptly it felt like watching a unit switch from funeral detail to live extraction without changing uniforms. People moved faster. Voices sharpened. Tasks found owners. And through it all, Claire stayed near Eli's head, close enough to catch every flicker. At one point, Maya looked over and asked quietly, "Why didn't you say something sooner about your background?" Claire's eyes stayed on the patient. "Because backgrounds don't matter when the body is telling you what to do." Maya let that sit for a moment. "And this body was telling you what?" Claire answered in the same calm tone she used for everything hardest. That he was fighting the machine, not disappearing into it. Nathan heard that. His throat worked once as he looked at his son. No one in ICU 7 used the word miracle. The room had passed beyond language that simple. What stood at the bedside now was not proof of magic. It was proof that the story everyone had accepted about Eli Crow was incomplete, and incompleteness in medicine could kill as surely as negligence. The portable printer on the EEG unit spat out a strip of data. Vance tore it free and scanned the repeated rises with clinical intensity. Stimulus-linked response, he murmured. Weak, but there. Halpern nodded after a long pause. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. "I want the original scans reviewed again, every one of them." "They already are," Maya said. Pike stepped back toward the door phone in hand, quietly sending messages that would move through administration like a pressure wave. Privacy protocols, specialist scheduling, risk management, maybe legal, maybe public relations. Hospitals were ecosystems of care and fear, and both had just been activated at once. Nathan ignored all of them. He sat down in the bedside chair for the first time since the room had changed, and still kept one hand on Eli as though contact itself might serve as an anchor. Claire checked the IV rate, then the vent settings, then the oxygen line, and finally let herself look at Eli's face without filtering it through equipment. There, along the eyelids. A tension too subtle for anyone not trained to see the body before the chart. A stirring beneath the stillness, not waking, not yet, but gathering. She had seen men on litters look like that in the minute before they broke through, shock enough to hear their own names. Bodies did not always return in speech. Sometimes they returned first in effort. Maya looked up from the screen. "I'm getting reproducible patterns now." Vance gave a small grim nod. "So am I." Halpern's voice was low. "Then we need to ask what state he's actually been in." No one answered. They were all already asking it. And Nathan Crow, seated beside the son he had been told to let go, tightened his hand gently around Eli's fingers and spoke in a voice meant for one person alone. "Stay with me, son." The monitor answered with another faint rise. Outside, the window's full morning had begun to wash the front range in cold gold light. Inside ICU-7, the darkness that had ruled for 6 months had not vanished, but it no longer owned the room, because now the staff had data. Nathan had response. Claire had confirmation. And Eli Crow, who had lain silent while the world prepared to end his story, had finally done something more terrifying to certainty than die. He had answered. The sentence did not exist anywhere in Eli Crow's chart yet, but it had already taken control of the room. For 6 months, Blackstone Medical Center had treated ICU-7 as a place where time collected without changing anything. Families changed. Staff rotated. Seasons moved across the Front Range. Snow came and went from the ridges west of town. But inside that room, the same machines kept the same patient in the same unresolved state, while medicine repeated the same conclusion with cleaner and cleaner language. Now the conclusion was under attack. No one said miracle. Not Vance, not Halpern, not Claire, certainly not Nathan. Miracles belonged to people who could afford loose definitions. What stood at Eli's bedside now was something harder and more dangerous than a miracle. It was contradiction. Dr. Samuel Vance stepped closer to the portable EEG monitor until the pale grid of the screen reflected in his glasses. The room had grown crowded. Respiratory therapy remained at the ventilator. Maya Torres sat at the equipment cart, fingers moving over settings with quick precision. Halpern hovered near the foot of the bed with the posture of a man still trying to keep authority from slipping out through his hands. Director Pike stood by the door, silent now, as if she understood that any sentence she spoke too early might age badly within minutes. Claire remained near Eli's head, close enough to see what the monitors had not yet learned to interpret on their own. Vance studied the live tracing as Nathan spoke softly to his son. Eli, you are at Blackstone. You had an accident. You are safe. The EEG line rose again. Not a surge, a response. Small, patterned present. Vance pointed to the repeating shifts. This is not random discharge. Halpern crossed to the screen. We need to be careful. We are being careful, Vance said. Careful is why we are not calling this recovery after one trace. Careful is also why we stop pretending a silent chart answers a moving brain. Halpern did not reply. He was reading the data now with the kind of focused hostility that good doctors reserve for facts that inconvenience earlier certainty. He knew better than anyone in the room how much professional pride could contaminate observation. That knowledge did not make the swallowing easier. Maya turned one setting down and checked the filter again. I am stripping out motion artifact. The pattern holds. Nathan looked from her to Vance. Tell me plainly. Vance shifted his attention toward him. He had the weathered face of a physician who had spent decades standing inside bad news and learning how to separate fear from fact. Plainly, General, your son is generating organized neurological responses to external stimulus. Right now, they are weak. They are inconsistent. But they are there. Nathan absorbed that without blinking. That means he hears us. It means there is a responding system in there, Vance said. Exactly what level of awareness it represents, we do not know yet. Nathan nodded once. He was a military man. He respected truth that arrived with limits attached. Claire checked the pulse ox on Eli's finger. The oxygen held steady. His breathing remained mostly machine-driven, but the subtle resistance she had noticed days earlier now appeared with enough frequency that even the respiratory therapist had stopped hiding his attention. The therapist glanced across the vent screen. He is trying to initiate above the set rate every few cycles. Halpern looked over sharply. Trying is not sustaining. No, Claire said quietly. But it is trying. Halpern turned toward her. For 1 second, the room held the possibility of confrontation. Not loud, not dramatic, just the deep professional discomfort that comes when the least decorated voice in the room keeps being right where everyone else has already published certainty. But Halpern surprised her. He let out a measured breath and said, "Then we document trying." It was not surrender. It was better. It was correction. Maya looked up from the monitor. I want a full repeat panel. Imaging, too. If we have any chance of seeing active regions wake under stimulus, I need updated data. Vance nodded. Order it. Pike spoke for the first time in almost a minute. Can he be transported? Vance glanced at the ventilator, then at Claire, then back to the screen. Not yet. We stabilize this pattern first. Portable imaging if we can get it. Nothing aggressive until we know what state he is coming out of. Pike gave a brief nod and stepped into the hallway to make the call. Her heels clicked once against the polished floor and vanished into the muted noise outside. Nathan remained where he was. He had not fully trusted his knees since Eli's fingers had twitched against his hand, so he kept one palm on the bed rail and the other over his son's motionless fingers as though contact itself might steady reality. Vance's eyes went back to the tracing. Run another command set. Halpern frowned. Repeated stimulation could fatigue him. Claire answered before anyone else. Then keep it brief. Vance looked to Nathan. Your voice next. We need to compare familiar command cadence with personal recognition. Nathan gave a slow nod. The request did not surprise him. His whole life had been built around voices that meant different things under pressure. Orders, warnings, names called through gunfire. The body learned to sort tone before words. Perhaps the brain did too. He bent closer to Eli, lowering his mouth near his son's ear the way Claire had done. The room went quiet enough to hear the faint click of the IV pump. Nathan's voice changed as he spoke. It did not become softer. It became narrower, sharpened into the kind of command used not to dominate but to cut through noise. Eli Crow, listen to me. The heart monitor gave a tiny change in rhythm. Maya's head snapped up. Nathan continued. Eyes open if you hear this. Nothing visible happened. Then Vance pointed at the screen. There, again. A cluster of channels had lifted in a pattern almost identical to the earlier response. Nathan did not blink. Stay with me, son. Hold your position. Another wave, slightly stronger. Halpern leaned in. This could indicate deep preserved processing. Language linked. Conditioned recognition. Conditioned to what Maya asked. Claire answered without moving. Marine cadence. Nathan looked at her. Not because he disagreed, because he knew she was right. Eli had grown up hearing command voice at base housing graduation ceremonies, training fields, family days, hangars, parade grounds, and quiet late-night conversations after bad deployments when the language of the Corps had still clung to Nathan like smoke. The rhythm of it was part of the boy's childhood, even if he had never worn the uniform himself. Vance studied Eli's face. Do it once more, then stop. Nathan's throat worked once, then he leaned close enough that his breath moved a strand of hair near Eli's temple. Breathe with me, he said. Take the next one yourself. The ventilator cycled. The pressure curve shifted. A shallow breath came from Eli before the machine completed its support. Respiratory looked from the screen to the chest movement. He initiated. No one in the room moved for 1 full second after that. It was the kind of second that separated one life from another. Halpern finally reached for the chart tablet and began dictating updates in a voice stripped clean of all earlier certainty. Observed organized cortical response to verbal stimulus. Repeated. Observed patient-initiated respiratory effort. Repeat neuroimaging ordered. Full support continuation indicated. Claire listened to him without expression. The words were important, but they were late. Eli's body had been saying some version of them for days. The room had only just become willing to learn the language. Maya printed another strip from the portable EEG and handed it to Vance. He held the paper in one hand, tracing the irregular rises with his thumb. This pattern is not dead tissue, he said. Halpern nodded slow and reluctant, but unmistakable, no. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, not in exhaustion, but because the force of those 2 letters had to go somewhere inside him, and there was no room left. Claire stepped closer to check Eli's pupils again. The response remained minimal, but not absent now. Not empty. The eyelids held a faint tension at the corners. The jawline tightened once when suction tubing brushed the edge of his mouth. These were still fragile signs. Anyone reckless could have inflated them into a speech. Claire did not. She simply observed them the way one watches the edge of a storm for movement. Vance turned toward Halpern. "Pull the original trauma file. It is in the system," Halpern said. "Not the summary, the full file. Imaging, transport notes, crash report, everything." Halpern held his gaze for a beat, then handed his tablet to Maya. "Bring up the original case package." She tapped quickly through layers of records while the room rearranged itself around the new priority. Nurses came and went with supplies. Another respiratory therapist checked settings and left. Someone from portable imaging called through the unit desk to say a machine was being moved upstairs. The Marines remained outside the door, still as carved stone, but one of them lifted a hand to his earpiece and quietly relayed something down the hall. The full file opened on Maya's screen. A photograph from the crash scene appeared first. The frame of Eli's SUV crumpled against rock and guardrail snow, dusted across the shoulder emergency lights, staining the dark with red and blue. Nathan looked away from the image immediately. Claire did not. She had learned long ago that photographs sometimes revealed truths narratives preferred to soften. Maya scrolled. Flight notes. Trauma intake. Emergency surgery. Neurological exam findings. Serial scans. Vance studied the first imaging set, then the second. He leaned closer. Halpern came beside him. Whatever lived in those scans held them both still for almost 20 seconds. What Nathan asked. Neither doctor answered right away. Claire watched their faces instead of the screen. Vance's expression had narrowed into pure analytical focus. Halpern's had taken on that disconcerting quality doctors get when they are being forced to revise not a detail but a foundation. Maya broke the silence first. "The injury pattern is odd." Nathan turned toward her. "Odd how?" She glanced at Halpern, then at Vance as if checking how far she could go before seniority objected. Vance spoke. "There is severe trauma. No one is disputing that. But some of the suppression pattern we are seeing now and some of the absence we saw earlier does not map cleanly onto straightforward blunt impact alone." Nathan stared at him. "Use words that do not belong in a journal." Vance lifted a hand toward the scan. "Your son's brain may have begun shutting down before the car finished crashing." The room went still again. Halpern said, "We cannot conclude that yet." No, Vance agreed, "but we can stop excluding it." Nathan looked from one doctor to the other, then back to the scan. The image on the tablet meant little to him in technical terms. White arcs, gray shadows, dark voids, a language written in tissue and contrast. But the tone in Vance's voice told him enough. "You think the crash was not the whole event," he said. Vance met his eyes. "I think something else may have happened first." Claire felt that sentence settle into place somewhere she had already been looking. She stepped closer to the tablet. "Show me the transport notes." Halpern gave her a brief glance that might once have stopped a junior nurse. It did not now. Maya handed her the screen without objection. Claire read quickly. Initial extraction. Hypoxia risk. Blunt trauma. Glass lacerations. Field instability. There, in the first responder summary, a line almost buried between vitals and mechanism of injury. Patient found with significant autonomic irregularity, inconsistent with observed blood loss. She read it twice. Nathan saw the shift in her face. "What is it?" Claire turned the tablet slightly so he could see the note, though she knew it would mean little by itself. His system was already unstable in a way the scene did not fully explain. Halpern crossed his arms. "Shock after major trauma is not surprising." Claire shook her head. This note was taken at extraction. It reads more like the body was already in catastrophic stress. Maya added, "And if his nervous system was in extreme protective suppression before full impact, that could complicate every exam afterward." Nathan's jaw tightened. Because of what? No one answered immediately. Then Claire asked the question that had been waiting in the room since before dawn. What was happening in his life before the crash? Nathan looked at Eli. For the first time since the room had changed, the general seemed to lose his footing on something that had nothing to do with medicine. He stayed silent long enough that the machines reclaimed the soundscape around him. Ventilator, monitor, distant footsteps in the hall, the hiss of heat moving through the vent by the window. Finally, he said he was distracted. Claire did not look away. "You said that before." Nathan nodded. "More than distracted. Focused in a way I had not seen before. Obsessed, maybe, with what Vance asked." Nathan kept his eyes on his son, his computer, closed calls, things he stopped explaining when I entered the room. Claire remembered the late-night conversations Nathan had mentioned days earlier. Freight routes, military transport systems, verification protocols. "What was he asking you?" she said. Nathan let out a slow breath. "Questions about logistics networks. Secure routing. How military shipments are tracked when they move through contracted channels." Maya frowned. Why would an 18-year-old ask that? Nathan's mouth hardened. Because he was very good with systems and too used to getting answers. Claire studied him carefully. "Did he have access to anything connected to your work?" "Number." The answer came hard and immediate, then quieter not through me. That was different. Halpern, who had remained mostly inside the medical lane since the room turned, glanced from Nathan to the file. "Was your son involved in anything that might have exposed him to extreme stress before the crash?" Nathan did not answer at once. The silence itself became evidence. Claire saw it and moved gently, not letting the question become accusation. "Sir, I am not asking to assign fault." Nathan looked at her. "I know," he said. His voice had changed. Less command now. More father. More man dealing with the possibility that one missed conversation might have cost him 6 months with his son. He had been sleeping less, Nathan said. He stopped eating with me some nights. He kept his laptop locked even in the house. That was not normal. Eli was private but not secretive. Then, about a week before the crash, he asked me what happens when supply data and movement reports do not match. Vance glanced up sharply. "And what did you tell him?" Nathan gave a humorless breath. "That in the Marine Corps, if numbers do not match, someone loses sleep until they do." Did he say why he asked? He said it was for a coding project. Claire asked, "Did you believe him?" Nathan looked at the floor for the briefest moment. I wanted to. The words hung there again, heavier this time. Maya kept scrolling through the case package. "There is a security appendix attached to the accident report." Halpern turned toward her. "Why would that be in a hospital file?" "Because the patient is the son of a commanding general," Pike said from the doorway. No one had noticed her step back in. She crossed the threshold with that smooth, administrative composure that always seemed 1 degree too controlled for rooms like this. Any incident involving his family generated coordination between civilian investigators and military liaisons. Claire looked at her. "And that appendix includes what?" Pike's expression barely changed. "Nothing material to patient care." Nathan's head turned toward her with the speed of someone hearing bad grammar in a battlefield report. "Then why is it attached?" Pike held his gaze. "Because your office requested full chain of custody on external documentation." Nathan's voice cooled. "My office requests many things. That is not an answer." Vance extended a hand toward Maya. "Open it." Pike took 1 step forward. "That is not necessary right now." Claire noticed the exact moment every person in the room heard the same thing inside that sentence. Not concern. Resistance. Nathan's voice went flat. "Open it." Maya tapped the appendix. A list of technical records filled the screen. Crash reconstruction summary. Vehicle diagnostics. Highway camera references. Phone extraction logs. Home network activity snapshot from the night before the accident. Claire leaned in. There it was. A series of timestamps from Eli's residential internet connection flagged because an external investigative team had reviewed his devices after the crash. One entry was highlighted in red. Unauthorized access attempt to Department of Defense Logistics mirror node. Maya whispered, "What is that?" Nathan stared at the line as though it had been written by someone else's child. Halpern looked confused, a mirror node. Claire answered without taking her eyes off the screen. A data shadow, a copied system used for transfer redundancy or analysis. Maya scrolled further. File access logs appeared beneath the entry. Not names an ordinary teenager would ever stumble onto by accident. Shipment manifests, route amendments, sealed cargo movement authorizations, contract transfer confirmations. Several were marked classified. One was marked under review due to discrepancy. The room seemed to contract around the tablet. Nathan's face had gone utterly still. It was a look Claire had seen before on commanders receiving information too damaging to react to emotionally in public. "My son had no clearance," he said. Claire nodded slowly. Then he found something he was never meant to see. Pike spoke carefully. "There is no evidence he successfully accessed restricted intelligence." Maya pointed to the file list. "Then why are there document opens?" Pike's composure tightened. That was never confirmed as authenticated interaction. Halpern glanced between them. Why was none of this brought up during his medical case review? Pike looked at him. "Because your department was reviewing a catastrophic neurological injury, not conducting a criminal inquiry." Nathan finally took his eyes off the screen and turned toward Pike. His voice remained low, but the entire room felt it. "My son nearly died on a mountain road. He has been lying in this bed for 6 months while this sat in an appendix no one thought relevant." Pike held his stare. General Crow, with respect the investigators, concluded brake failure. Claire spoke before he could. "Brake failure explains the wreck. It does not explain why his home network was tied to restricted shipment records the night before." Pike did not answer. Vance, who had no patience for institutional choreography in a patient room, looked to Maya. "Keep scrolling." She did. There were notes from accident reconstruction. Mechanical failure confirmed in primary braking system. No definitive evidence of tampering. Yet, lower in the report, a supplemental observation from a consulting analyst had been marked unresolved. Driver behavior prior to impact suggests possible delayed corrective response, inconsistent with recorded speed and weather conditions. Claire read it aloud. Nathan frowned, meaning Halpern answered before Vance could. Meaning he may have been compromised before the moment of brake failure. Distracted, disoriented, under extreme stress, Maya added, or neurologically impaired. Nathan's eyes went to Eli at once. Claire felt the pieces sliding toward each other with an unsettling fit. If Eli had discovered something on those systems, and if what he found had frightened him enough, or if someone had reached him before the crash in a way strong enough to push his body into a catastrophic survival state, then the accident was not the beginning of the story. It was only the point where everyone else noticed. She looked back at the security log. One more entry had been flagged just after the document access time. Outgoing encrypted message failed to send. Recipient unknown. Nathan saw her reading. What? Claire turned the screen slightly. He tried to send something. To who? It does not say. Pike stepped forward. This line of discussion is not appropriate in front of the patient. Nathan's head turned slowly toward her. The patient is my son. Pike did not answer. Maya scrolled to the message metadata. There was not much there. Timestamp. File size. Encryption marker. Failed transmission. Then below it a line from local investigators that changed the atmosphere again. Subject vehicle observed by distant traffic camera with possible trailing headlights for approximately 11 miles prior to crash. The room went silent. Nathan looked at the tablet as if it had become a weapon. Why was I not shown this? Pike said, because the camera image was inconclusive. Inconclusive enough to bury. General Crow. Your office was briefed that the investigation remained open in several areas. My office, Nathan said, is not my son. Claire watched Eli's face while the adults argued around him. There had been a small tightening around the eyes when Nathan's voice changed. A pulse response when the conversation turned toward the logs. It was impossible to know how much, if anything, Eli understood, but his body was no longer absent from the room. It reacted now, subtly, unevenly, enough to matter. She leaned close to him, lowering her voice so only those nearest could hear. Eli. If you can hear this, you are safe in this room. We need you to stay with us. The heart monitor shifted. Maya looked up. Another change. Nathan bent down at once. Eli, listen to me. Whatever happened, you are not alone now. The EEG gave a faint answering rise. Vance's attention cut back from the file to the screen. He is tracking emotional stimulus. Claire did not move away. He may be reacting to the content. Halpern frowned. We cannot know that. No, Claire said. But we can stop talking around him like he is gone. That rebuke, quiet as it was, struck every clinician in the room a little differently. Vance tore his eyes from the screen and looked at Nathan. For now, keep the environment controlled. Familiar voices. No overload. The response is fragile. Nathan nodded. Fragile did not frighten him. He had built a career handling fragile lines under pressure. But this fragility was personal in a way combat had never been. He sat in the chair again and took Eli's hand with deliberate gentleness. The fingers were still. The skin was warm now in a way that no longer felt merely maintained. Nathan leaned close. Eli, I need you to hear me. You do not have to carry whatever this is by yourself. You hear me, son. There was a long stillness after that. The kind that made everyone measure time by breath counts and monitor beeps. Maya returned to the file, this time opening the list of flagged documents. Several shipment manifests involved overseas equipment movement through civilian contractors. One route amendment had been highlighted by a military reviewer as containing duplicate routing numbers assigned to cargo, logged under different weights. Maya frowned. These records do not reconcile. Halpern looked at the entries. I do not even know what I am looking at. Nathan did. Claire saw it in his face before he spoke. Not the full meaning, maybe, but enough of it to know that duplicate routing in military transport was not the kind of clerical error people shrugged off and forgot. His voice was very quiet. If those numbers overlap, then someone was moving something under the cover of something else. No one responded immediately. Pike did not look at him. Claire noticed that too. She also noticed the way Nathan's military mind had arrived at the implication faster than anyone in the room. It was not random data to him. It was supply chain camouflage, hidden cargo, falsified paperwork, the kind of discrepancy that could ruin careers or bury far worse. A nurse from the main station appeared in the doorway with portable imaging staff behind her. We are ready for the bedside scan. Vance nodded. Set up. The room shifted again as machines were rearranged to make space. Leads were checked. Angles adjusted. Eli's head positioned carefully. Through all of it, Nathan did not let go of his son's hand. Claire moved to assist with line management, but her attention stayed split between Eli and the tablet still glowing on the counter. The failed message. The trailing headlights. The mirrored logistics node. None of it belonged in a simple accident. While the portable scanner powered on Maya quietly copied the flagged entries into a restricted note for the clinical record. Halpern saw her doing it and said nothing. He understood now that if a patient's neurological status had intersected with external stressors significant enough to affect diagnosis, the chart no longer belonged to medicine alone. Pike noticed too. That note will need access restriction. Halpern looked at her. It will need preservation. There was steel in his voice now. A different kind from Nathan's, but real. The kind that arrived when a physician realized institutional neatness had begun to interfere with patient truth. The scanner hummed to life. Lights dimmed slightly over the bed. The machine emitted a soft mechanical sweep as it began collecting its first imaging pass. No one spoke above a murmur. The whole room had become reverent again, but not in the old way. Not death watch. Investigation. Claire stood near Eli's shoulder and watched his face as the scan ran. The eyelids fluttered. Small enough that anyone focused on the equipment might have missed it. She leaned in, Nathan. He looked up at once. Claire kept her voice low. His eyes. Nathan stared. There it was again. not opening. A tremor beneath the lids followed by a faint tension in the brow. Maya saw it too. Did that happen on command? Nathan bent closer. Eli. The flutter returned. The image technician nearly forgot to keep his hands moving. Vance stepped to the bedside. Document spontaneous eyelid movement with verbal correlation. Halpern spoke it into the update record immediately. Nathan swallowed hard. Son, if you hear me, squeeze my hand. Everyone in the room seemed to stop breathing. Nathan's hand enclosed Eli's gently. The contrast between them was stark. One weathered and strong, one thinner, now too still for too long. Seconds passed. Nothing. Then the slightest motion ran through Eli's fingers. One flex, weak enough that a stranger could have dismissed it. Clear enough that no one in that room did. Nathan froze. The hand moved again. This time the fingers curled with unmistakable intention against his father's palm. Maya whispered voluntary. No one corrected her. Nathan bowed his head over their joined hands and shut his eyes. The room gave him that much privacy, even while standing inches away. Claire watched the monitor. The heart rhythm had lifted again. The EEG pattern trembled with fragile activity that no longer needed imagination to exist. Eli's breathing remained assisted, but one shallow effort after another now pressed up under the machine like a body trying to reclaim territory it had surrendered only under force. Vance broke the silence first. He is not only responding, he is emerging. Halpern let out a breath that sounded almost like disbelief stripped of ego. Yes. Nathan opened his eyes and looked at his son as though seeing him for the first time after a war. Eli, he said, voice barely above a whisper. That is it. Stay with me. Claire turned toward the tablet one last time. The flagged file list remained on the screen. The failed message sat there like an unfinished sentence. The line about headlights behind Eli's vehicle remained buried in the reconstruction notes. The unresolved discrepancies in shipment records pulsed with a significance no one in a hospital room was fully equipped to handle. Then Eli's fingers tightened once more around Nathan's hand. Not much. Enough. And in the blue light of ICU 7, with the bedside scanner humming and the truth beginning to move in several directions at once, Clare Bennett understood that the boy in the bed had not simply come back into danger. He had come back carrying it. The pressure in ICU 7 changed the instant everyone in the room understood that truth. Until then, the bed had been the center of the story. The machines, the chart, the impossible reversal unfolding in real time. A son returning from 6 months of silence, a father being handed back the smallest pieces of him one motion at a time. But the tablet on the counter had opened another front, and no one standing in that room was simple enough to miss it. Nathan Crow kept his hand around Eli's and felt the second weak curl of those fingers before they loosened again. The touch lasted less than a breath. It was enough to strike him with more force than most explosions he had survived in uniform. He looked up at Claire, and for the first time all morning, there was no guarded command in his face, no rank, no careful restraint. There was only a father trying to stand upright inside relief so sudden it hurt. You saw that, he said. Claire nodded. Yes, sir. Maya Torres was already documenting the movement, her voice clipped and professional, because professionalism was the only thing keeping awe from taking over the room. Observed voluntary flexion in response to verbal cue and paternal contact, she said into the recorder. Repeatable, weak, but purposeful. Dr. Samuel Vance did not take his eyes off the monitor. Continue light support reduction, slowly. We do not force him into work he cannot sustain. Respiratory moved to the ventilator and adjusted the settings by fractions, so small they barely seemed worth the motion, but in critical care, fractions separated care from harm. The machine responded with a soft change in tone, still breathing for Eli but not owning every breath the way it had an hour earlier. Claire stepped in close enough to watch his chest. The rise remained shallow, the effort still uneven. Yet now she could see it in a way no one could mistake. His body was not simply receiving air, It was beginning to reach for it. Nathan bent toward his son again. "Eli," he said quietly. "That was good. Do it again." The heart monitor shifted. Maya looked up at the screen. Another response. Vance gave a short nod. Keep his environment steady. Familiar voice, minimal noise. That instruction would have been easier if the room had not become a magnet. Word had spread through the unit and beyond. Every clinician who had ever signed, reviewed, or whispered about the Crow case was now feeling the pull of contradiction. Faces appeared in the glass outside, then moved on when security glanced their way. Nurses from other halls found reasons to pass by. A chaplain who had been discreetly told to remain on standby earlier that morning stopped at the far end of the corridor and quietly turned back around. Director Eleanor Pike noticed the same gathering attention and disliked every second of it. She stepped away from the bedside scanner and lowered her voice toward Halpern. "This floor needs tighter control immediately." Halpern, still watching Eli's trace, answered without looking at her. "Then control it." Pike's expression sharpened. "If this turns into rumor before we know what we are dealing with, the hospital becomes the story." Halpern finally looked at her. The exhaustion in his face had been joined now by something cleaner and harder. A physician's anger at having been organized around the wrong conclusion. "A patient becomes the story when the patient changes," he said. "The hospital can survive attention." Claire caught Pike's reaction out of the corner of her eye. It was slight but there. A tightening around the mouth. Not from concern for care, from concern over narrative. Claire filed it away the same way she had filed the failed message and the trailing headlights and the mirrored logistics node. Separate details, same feeling. At the bed, Eli's breathing pattern shifted again. Respiratory leaned closer to the vent screen. He's initiating more often now. Vance checked the readout. Keep him supported, but let him work. Nathan absorbed the words with the focused calm of a man who had spent his life being told to hold fire while something fragile stayed in range. He leaned near his son's ear, speaking low enough to make the room fall back around them. "You're doing fine, son. Stay on my voice." Claire watched Eli's brow. A slight pull, then another. Not random, not smooth. More like a body surfacing through deep water, confused by the pressure change and not yet sure which way was up. She moved to the head of the bed. "Doctor, his face is starting to tighten." Maya looked over. "Agitation. More like awareness," Claire said. Vance came closer, watched the heart rate. The number climbed. Not dangerously. Enough to matter. Enough to say that a nervous system buried for months had started to feel the room again. Nathan saw the same change in Eli's face and instinctively squeezed his hand. "Eli, you're in a hospital. You're in Colorado Springs. You had an accident. You are safe." The eyelids trembled. No one in the room breathed. Maya whispered, "He's trying." Claire knew that look. She had seen it in field tents when pain arrived before memory, and men woke into terror because their bodies understood danger before their minds could locate it. She put one hand lightly near Eli's shoulder, not restraining, only grounding. "Eli," she said in a calmer voice now, stripped of command and built for orientation. "Listen to me. You are in Blackstone Medical Center. You are not on the road. You are not alone. Follow the sound of our voices." The eyelids lifted a fraction. Blue. Confused. Wet. Then they shut again. Nathan made a sound so low it barely became breath. Maya stared at the screen, then at Eli, then back to the chart recorder, as if she needed the act of documenting to convince herself she had not imagined it. "Spontaneous eye-opening attempt," she said, voice unsteady for the first time all morning. Halpern spoke into the update record immediately. Visual response observed, brief but definite. Vance did not look away from the patient. Good, now keep him calm. That was easier said than done. Coming back from the edge was not gentle work. The body woke in fragments. Pain found its roots first, then fear, then the fight to understand where the pain belonged. Eli's pulse climbed another few beats. A crease appeared between his brows. His fingers moved weakly under Nathan's hand, not with the earlier deliberate squeeze, but with the unsettled motion of someone caught halfway between worlds. Claire saw the distress before the numbers fully showed it. He feels the tube now. Respiratory nodded once, not enough to extubate yet. No, Vance said. But we can begin planning for it if his breathing effort holds. Nathan bent closer. Eli, there's a tube helping you breathe. Do not fight it, not yet. The boy's eyes opened again, this time wider. Only for a second, but long enough for everyone in the room to see what lived in them. Not recognition first. Fear. A hard, immediate flash of terror that did not belong to a patient merely waking in a hospital. It was the look of someone returning to the exact edge of whatever had sent him under. Claire leaned in fast, voice steady and direct. Eli, look at me. His eyes found her for the briefest instant. You are in the ICU, she said. You are safe right now. Stay here. Right now. Nathan heard the phrase and glanced toward her, but he understood why she chose it. Absolute promises were for people who had not learned how quickly rooms changed. Eli's gaze moved past Claire, searching. His pulse jumped. His chest hit the ventilator with a strained, shallow effort that tripped an alarm. Respiratory silenced it and adjusted the synchrony. Easy, the therapist said, easy. Nathan brought his face into Eli's line of sight. Son, it's Dad. The eyes focused badly, then better. Confusion remained. Pain remained. But beneath both, some deeper recognition caught. The heart rate steadied by degrees. Maya let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. He knows him. Or knows the voice, Vance said. Nathan did not care which. He kept talking, one hand over Eli's, the other braced on the rail to keep himself from shaking. I'm here, he said. I never left. The eyes closed again, but this time the fear did not harden before they did. Claire stepped back half a pace. The room had crossed another line. Eli was no longer only a patient with signs. He was a person trying to re-enter consciousness, while the remains of whatever had broken him still lived close to the surface. Portable imaging finished its pass, and the technician handed the first rough reconstruction to Vance. He scanned it quickly, then handed it to Halpern. The scan would need formal review, but even on a first look, the active regions were enough to deepen the contradiction already rippling through the case. This is more than reflexive preservation, Vance said. Halpern nodded, yes. Pike watched them both. Then how soon before he can communicate? Vance did not hide his irritation. Director, he is not a deposition. The words landed. Pike said nothing after that, but Claire marked the question. Not how is he? Not what does he need? How soon can he communicate? Nathan marked it too. He rose from the chair with the slow precision of a man trying not to look as angry as he had just become. No one asks my son for anything except what helps him recover. Pike met his stare with practiced neutrality. Of course, but the room had become too sharp for practiced neutrality to pass unexamined. Claire glanced at the chart terminal mounted on the wall near the door. A login window had flashed, then disappeared. She frowned. Maya, she said quietly. Did you reopen the chart there? Maya looked over. No, I'm on the tablet. Halpern turned. I did not. Claire crossed the room in 2 steps and touched the screen. The terminal had returned to its lock page. Nothing unusual visible now, but she had seen the active cursor blink just before it timed out. When did that come on, she asked. No one answered. Pike followed her gaze. Shared terminals cycle all the time. Claire looked at the black screen a second longer than necessary, then turned back toward the bed. Perhaps Pike was right. Perhaps. Yet the sensation remained, the same one she had learned never to ignore in unstable places. Not proof, pattern. Outside the room, a man in maintenance coveralls pushed an equipment cart past the glass, slowed almost imperceptibly as his eyes flicked inside, then kept moving when he realized Claire was watching him. Hospital hallways were full of people who had reasons to look into rooms. Still, she tracked him until he disappeared around the corner. Nathan saw her do it. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Claire shook her head once. "Nothing I can use yet." He understood that answer better than most civilians would have. He had spent too many years acting on the difference between suspicion and evidence to mistake one for the other. Back at the bed, Eli's breathing effort continued to build in uneven waves. Supported, fragile, real. Every few cycles he drew more of the breath himself before the machine caught up to help. Respiratory adjusted settings again, allowing him a little more room without making him carry too much too soon. Vance studied the pattern. "If he continues like this through the next hour, we consider tube removal." Nathan looked down at Eli and visibly fought the instinct to push the process faster, simply because wanting had returned to the room. "If he is not ready, you wait." Vance gave him a brief nod. "That is the plan." Claire appreciated that exchange. It was the first fully aligned moment between father and medicine the room had seen all day. No denial, no false urgency. Only care directed at the same objective. For a while, the room settled into working focus. Nurses rotated supplies. Blood was drawn and sent. A repeat arterial gas confirmed what the ventilator already suggested. Eli was not breathing well on his own yet, but he was participating. That single word changed almost everything. Participating. Nathan stayed by the bed, speaking now in low, ordinary rhythms. Not command voice anymore. Just a father reintroducing a son to the world. "It snowed overnight," he said. "You always hated driving in it unless you thought you were better than everyone else on the road." A faint change crossed Eli's brow. Claire noticed. "He hears the familiar." Nathan nodded and kept going. "Your aunt called again. She still thinks if she bullies enough people, all of this becomes optional." The corner of Eli's mouth moved slightly around the tube. Not a smile. Not conscious enough for that. But the body registered the shape of family. Maya saw it and looked at Claire with a kind of growing respect that had moved beyond surprise. "You were right about familiar pathways." Claire's eyes remained on the patient. Sometimes the oldest roads survive the deepest damage. Maya glanced at her as if recognizing that sentence came from someplace lived rather than learned. Time became strange after that. The wall clock moved in clean legal minutes while everyone in the room lived by breath, squeeze, blink number. Eli drifted in and out of a rough half-awareness. Each time he surfaced, fear arrived first, then the voices pulled him back from it. Claire kept his orientation anchored. Nathan kept his world personal. The doctors kept the body from paying too high a price for returning. Late in the morning, once the immediate instability had eased enough for Vance to step out to review the scan in detail, Halpern came to stand beside Claire near the medication counter. For a second they watched Eli in silence. Then Halpern said I was wrong. Claire did not answer immediately. Not because she wanted to make him work for the admission, but because she could hear how much it had cost him to speak it aloud. "We all miss things," she said. He looked at her. "Not like this." "No," Claire said, "not like this." He exhaled slowly. "Why didn't you press harder when you first noticed the changes?" Claire glanced at the monitors, then back at Eli. "Because by the time I entered the case, 6 months of certainty were already in the room before I was. I needed something stronger than instinct." Halpern's expression tightened. He understood the indictment in that without resenting it. "And today he gave it to us." Halpern nodded once, that was all. Yet in a hospital where hierarchies often hardened faster than tissue, the admission mattered. Nathan joined them a moment later, though his attention remained split between Claire and the bed. When he opens his eyes, he said it is like he is looking at something else first. Claire knew exactly what he meant. Trauma. "Memory often wakes before context," she said, "especially if the body came under threat before it lost consciousness." Nathan looked toward the counter where the tablet still rested with the copied security entries. "You think he remembers the road?" "I think he remembers enough to be scared." Nathan's jaw set. "Then whoever put that fear in him is still part of this." Halpern glanced toward the Pike, who was speaking quietly on the phone near the hall. her back half turned to them. There may be explanations that are ugly without being criminal. Nathan's gaze shifted to him. There may. The general's voice made clear he considered that the least likely option. A security officer entered briefly to confer with Pike and left again. Claire watched the exchange without seeming to. When Pike ended the call, she walked toward Nathan. General Crow. I have arranged restricted access to the floor. Only essential staff and cleared visitors will be permitted through the wing. Nathan's expression did not soften. Good. Pike folded her hands. Given the sensitive material tied to your son's file, I recommend we limit conversation about the accident until military counsel is present. Claire heard the wording. Limit conversation. Not preserve the patient, not reduce stress, control information. Nathan heard it too. My son wakes when he wakes, he said. He speaks when he can. No administrator in this building decides which memory reaches his mouth first. Pike's face remained composed, but she chose not to push further. She left the room with the same polished gait she had arrived in, and Claire watched the door close behind her with no reduction in unease. By early afternoon, Eli had held enough spontaneous breathing effort that Vance approved a carefully staged trial for extubation. No one moved quickly. Sedation was reviewed. Suction prepared. Emergency reintubation equipment checked and positioned within arm's reach. Claire handled the setup with the same field-level calm she had brought to everything else, but Nathan saw the precision in her movements sharpened by a degree. You've done this in rough places, he said quietly. Claire glanced at him once. Yes, sir. He nodded. You don't have to call me sir in here. The statement was simple. The meaning underneath it was not. Claire accepted it with the smallest shift in expression. All right. Respiratory explained the sequence to Nathan even though Eli, not Nathan, was the patient. Father's needed a map too. When we pull the tube, he may cough hard, the therapist said. He may panic. His voice will be rough if he can make sound at all. Keep talking to him, Nathan answered. I will. The room narrowed around the bed once more. Claire stood near Eli's shoulder. Maya managed the monitor updates. Halpern stayed at the foot with medications ready if agitation turned dangerous. Vance oversaw the whole process with the concentrated silence of a man who knew that after everything already defied expectation, the body could still fail in ordinary ways. Nathan leaned close to his son one more time before the tube came out. Eli, he said, listen to me. They are going to remove the tube now. It will feel wrong for a second. Stay with us. The eyes opened. Not fully. Enough. They found Nathan, then Claire. She saw the fear there again, but now it was tangled with effort, with need, with the beginning of intent. Good, she said softly. That's right, stay on us. Respiratory counted them through it. Suction, deflate, remove. The tube slid free. Eli coughed hard, body jerking with the raw violence of it. Nathan instinctively grabbed the rail. Claire steadied Eli at the shoulder, while the respiratory therapist cleared secretions and coached the first unsupported breaths. That's it, Claire said. Take the air, slow. Eli's chest hitched. Coughed again. Drew a ragged breath that sounded too small to trust, and then another one rough but his. The room listened like witnesses at the edge of an open grave, waiting to hear whether the earth moved. The pulse climbed. Oxygen dipped, then recovered. Another breath came, then another. Maya stared at the monitor. He's holding. Vance nodded. Keep support nearby. Let him settle. Nathan had gone very still. He looked at Eli the way a man might look at a city after smoke lifts and realize something is still standing. Eli's lips moved. No sound at first. The throat was too torn up, the body too weak, the return too recent. Nathan bent low enough that his forehead nearly brushed his son's hair. You don't have to force it. Eli swallowed painfully. Tried again. The first sound was broken and almost lost in the oxygen flow. Claire leaned closer, one hand resting lightly on the blanket near his wrist, not touching until his eyes found her, and then only to anchor him. It's all right, she said. One word if that's all you have. His gaze shifted fast, not around the room, but past it, searching corners no one else saw. The fear came back so sharply that Claire felt it before the monitors did. Nathan saw it too. Eli, look at me. Eli's eyes locked on his father. His mouth opened. The voice that came out was shredded to almost nothing. The word dissolved into a cough. Nathan leaned even closer. Who? Claire lifted a hand slightly toward him. Not to stop him forever, only to slow him now. Easy. Eli dragged in another breath. His brows pulled tight. For one terrible second it looked as though the effort would throw him back under. Then he forced the next two words through a throat still raw from tubing and months of silence. They knew. The room froze. Even the machines seemed to hold themselves still around the sentence. Nathan's face changed with military speed, all private emotion folding under immediate assessment. Who knew Eli? But Eli had already spent everything he had to give those words shape. His eyes squeezed shut. His breathing turned ragged again. Claire stepped in before anyone could make the mistake of turning desperation into interrogation. Enough, she said. Vance backed her instantly. No more questions. Not now. Nathan shut his eyes once, mastering himself. When he opened them again, he nodded. All right. Claire leaned close to Eli. You did enough. Just breathe. His fingers moved weakly toward the blanket, searching without strength. Nathan took his hand at once. There, Nathan said softly, I'm here. The room gradually restarted around them. Oxygen flow adjusted. Vitals rechecked. The fact of speech entered the chart. No one said the words aloud, but everyone felt the line the case had just crossed. Eli was not only emerging, he was carrying witness. Pike returned moments later and saw the changed configuration at once. Tube gone. Oxygen in place. Nathan at the bed. Staff in that peculiar posture hospitals take on after an impossible thing has become documented fact. Has he spoken? She asked. Nathan turned toward her slowly. Claire answered first. He needs rest. Pike's eyes moved from Claire to Halpern. Doctor. Halpern did not help her. The patient is recovering from extubation. It was not a denial. It was a boundary. Pike held herself still for a moment too long. I will coordinate with legal and military liaison. Nathan's voice was low enough to make everyone listen harder. You will coordinate with no one before I do. Pike left without replying. Claire watched the door, then looked back at Eli. His breathing remained rough, but each breath now came from him first. The machine stood by as backup, no longer commander. The body was reclaiming its own chain of command. Late afternoon light began angling through the high window, turning the edges of equipment gold. Snow glare brightened the far buildings outside. Inside ICU-7, the room had changed so completely from dawn that it no longer felt like the same place. Nathan sat beside the bed and said very little. He did not need to. He held Eli's hand and kept his presence simple. For a man who had spent his life directing movement, there was strange wisdom in that stillness. Claire remained close, not hovering, watching. Every time Eli surfaced, she reoriented him. Where he was, who was present, what was happening now. She did not mention the file or the traffic camera or the mirrored node. Not yet. The body needed one battle at a time. Once, as she checked his pulse manually, Eli's eyes opened and stayed open longer than before. They found her face with the hesitant focus of someone assembling reality piece by piece. You brought me back, he tried to say, but it came out only as breath and shape. Claire understood anyway. She shook her head lightly. You did the hard part. His eyes shifted to Nathan. Pain passed across the general's face so quickly most people would have missed it. Claire did not. Nathan leaned in. Don't spend strength on me. Breathe. Eli swallowed and obeyed. That more than anything told Claire how deep the old command roads ran. He was terrified, exhausted, half-assembled, and still some part of him knew how to follow his father's voice toward order. Near evening, after Vance had stepped out to update consulting services and Maya had gone to pull repeat labs, the room quieted again. Only Claire, Nathan Halpern, and one respiratory therapist remained with Eli. The silence was not empty this time. It had shape, weight, waiting. Nathan looked toward Claire without taking his hand off his son's. "You still think this was not just the crash?" Claire met his gaze. There was no point softening instinct after everything already on the table. Yes. Halpern remained at the foot of the bed listening. Nathan's jaw tightened. Because of the records. Because of the records, Claire said. Because of the failed message. Because he woke afraid before he woke confused. Because his body reacted to this conversation like it already knew it mattered. Halpern spoke carefully. "Those things suggest stress, not necessarily an attack," Nathan answered without looking at him. "I have buried men over smaller patterns than this." Claire believed him. A noise came from the hallway. Not loud. A cartwheel striking a seam in the floor, a murmur of voices, then quiet again. Eli's eyes opened. He looked first at the door. The fear arrived immediately. Claire saw it and moved to his line of sight before the room could misread the change. "Eli, stay here." His breathing quickened. Nathan stood so fast the chair legs scraped the floor. "Son." Eli's gaze zapped to him. The terror remained, but now it had direction. Urgency, not the blind fear of pain, the fear of someone trying to warn before the chance closed. His lips parted. No sound came. Claire dampened a swab and wet his mouth, then leaned close. Slow. One piece. Nathan braced a hand on the rail and brought his face near enough that Eli would not have to search. "What happened on the road?" he asked. Halpern opened his mouth to object, then stopped. The question had already crossed. Eli swallowed. His throat worked visibly. The effort cost him. "Heads," he rasped. Claire frowned. "Headlights." A faint movement in his eyes. Nathan nodded once. "Behind you." Another tiny movement. Claire kept her voice level. "You do not have to explain it all. Just enough." Eli dragged in air, coughed, fought through it. The muscles in his jaw bunched with pain. He looked at his father, then toward the counter where the tablet with the file still sat dark, then back again, as if the memory itself were connected to something he could not yet name. Nathan read the motion. The files. Eli's eyes tightened. Claire felt the room narrow to the space between each of his breaths. Nathan said very softly, "Did someone know what you found?" Eli's fingers twitched against the blanket. Not enough to point. Enough to answer. "Yes." Halpern stared at the boy as though watching medicine step over a line into evidence. Nathan's voice lowered even further. "Was the crash an accident?" For a second, Eli looked too weak to survive the question. Then, something changed in his face. Not fear this time. Effort turning into refusal. The body of an 18-year-old deciding through exhaustion and pain and 6 months of silence that one truth mattered enough to spend what strength remained. He forced in a breath. His lips moved once without sound. Claire leaned so close she could feel the heat of the air leaving him. The next words came out raw and thin, but there was nothing uncertain about them. Not breaks. The words were barely more than air and pain, but they hit the room with the force of a detonation. No one moved for one long second after Eli said them. The oxygen hissed softly through the nasal cannula. The monitor kept its measured count. Outside the windows, the late afternoon light over Colorado Springs had gone pale and hard, the kind of winter light that made distance look sharper than it really was. Nathan Crow stood beside the bed with one hand braced on the rail and the other around his son's fingers. He had heard wounded men say all kinds of things on the edge of consciousness over the course of his life. Fragments. Names. Training. Fear. Regret. But this was not delirium. The look in Eli's eyes had stripped the words clean of confusion. Halpern was the first to speak, though his voice had lost all the clinical certainty it had once carried. "Do not push him further." Claire did not take her eyes off Eli. "I'm not." She reached for the damp swab again, touched it gently to the corner of his mouth, then set it aside. Eli's throat worked with the effort of swallowing. His breathing remained ragged, but it was his. Each breath came with strain now, each one sounding like a body relearning how to belong to itself. Nathan bent closer. "Eli," he said quietly, "you do not need to explain everything right now." Eli's eyes stayed on him. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the blind terror of a person waking without context. It had direction now. Memory, meaning. Clare watched the rhythm strip the pulse, the fine tension around his eyes. He was already exhausting himself. The body had come too far too fast, and every extra demand carried a cost. "Stay with the breathing," she said. "That's all." Eli blinked once, slow, heavy. Then his gaze shifted toward the door. Nathan saw it. So did Clare. The general straightened and looked over his shoulder through the glass wall into the corridor. The Marines remained on post. A nurse crossed farther down the hall with a tray of syringes. Nothing looked wrong. Hospitals were full of motion that meant nothing. But the look in Eli's eyes had been too immediate, too specific to dismiss. Nathan turned back toward Halpern. "I want this floor locked down." Halpern did not hesitate. "I can request restricted access through security." "Do it." Clare finally looked away from Eli and toward the chart counter where the copied appendix entries remained on Maya's tablet. The failed message, the traffic camera note, the shipment discrepancies. All of it had already altered the shape of the room. Eli's words had only driven the point in deeper, not breaks. Break failure had been the official story, because official stories prefer the mechanical when the human is harder to control. A failed system, a tragic road, a terrible impact, clean language for a dirty truth. Pike came back into the room just as Halpern reached for the phone. Her eyes went first to Eli, then to Nathan's face, then to Clare. She knew something had changed. Administrators learned to read crisis without needing the details spelled out. It was not intuition so much as exposure. Too many rooms like this teach you what silence means when it turns directional. "Has there been further communication?" she asked. Nathan looked at her with a flatness that made everyone else in the room disappear for a moment. "Yes." Pike held his gaze, and Nathan did not answer. Clare saw the faintest irritation pass through Pike's face before it vanished behind professionalism. That alone told Clare more than the question itself. Halpern stepped in. "The patient needs reduced stimulation." Pike gave him a brief glance, then looked back to Nathan. "General Crow, if your son has provided any indication that this intersects with an open security matter, we need proper channels present." Nathan's hand tightened over the bed rail. "My son has provided indication that he nearly died because someone wanted the story to read one way, he said. That is all the channel I need at this moment." Pike opened her mouth, thought better of it, and said, "Security has already limited hallway access." Nathan did not break eye contact. "Limit records access, too." Pike hesitated. Just a fraction, but Clare saw it. "Done," Pike said. Nathan heard the hesitation as clearly as Clare did. So did Halpern. The room had become too sensitive for half-beats to go unnoticed. Eli drew another rough breath and coughed. Clare moved at once, lifting suction within reach, ready without crowding him. He recovered after 2 shallow attempts and settled again. The pulse steadied. The breathing remained thin but workable. "Enough talking," Clare said softly. "He needs recovery, not questions." Nathan looked down at his son and nodded once. The military part of him wanted data. Sequence, confirmation, time, direction. The father in him saw the cost each word was exacting and chose differently. "All right," he said. Then, quieter to Eli, "You've done enough for now." Eli's eyelids drooped. Fatigue was overtaking fear by degrees. That was good. Fatigue meant the body was choosing shutdown for healing, not collapse for survival. Maya re-entered with fresh lab results just as security arrived at the outer desk. Through the glass, Clare saw one of the Marines step aside and speak to the officer, posture never wavering. Within minutes, the trickle of observers in the corridor thinned. Doors closed farther down the wing. The hallway lost its casual traffic and took on a controlled stillness that matched the old military hospitals Claire had known overseas. Maya moved to the monitor cart and handed Vance the repeat arterial gas sheet. He scanned it, then nodded. "He is holding," he said. Nathan looked up sharply. "Without the tube?" "Yes." The answer did something to his face no one in the room could fully look at for long. Relief had been building in him all day in disciplined layers, and each new confirmation threatened to crack open something he had been holding shut for 6 months by force alone. Vance kept his tone level. "He is not out of danger, but he is here. There is no reason to discuss withdrawal anymore." No one answered, because the sentence was too large and too late and still deeply needed. Claire looked at Halpern. The doctor gave the smallest nod, not toward her exactly, but toward truth itself. He had crossed too far to go back now. The evening settled around the room in slow increments. Portable imaging was completed and taken for formal review. Additional consults were notified and deferred until morning, unless instability returned. The ICU wing dimmed its lights by protocol, but ICU 7 seemed to hold its own brightness. Not because the room had become warm. It had not. Hospitals never do. But the terrible stillness that had defined the place for half a year was gone. In its place lived movement. Fragile, measured, real. Nathan remained at Eli's side while the staff thinned to essentials. Claire stayed on the case even after her scheduled handoff time passed. No one told her to leave. No one wanted another nurse learning the room from scratch now that every detail mattered twice. At one point, Halpern stepped beside her near the medication station, both of them watching Nathan sit by the bed and speak low enough that only Eli could hear. "He keeps anchoring him," Halpern said. Claire nodded. "That's what he should do." Halpern glanced toward her. "You knew that before any of us." Claire kept her eyes on the bed. Not before, just sooner. The doctor let that stand between them for a moment. Then he said, "If the original classification was wrong, there will be reviews, questions, legal exposure." Claire's voice stayed even. Then they should ask better questions. Halpern gave a tired breath that almost became a laugh and failed halfway. "You are not particularly interested in protecting institutions." "No," Claire said. "Not when institutions confuse themselves for the patient." He looked at her then, and for the first time since the beginning of the day, there was no hierarchy in it. Only respect sharpened by hindsight. Across the room, Nathan lifted Eli's hand and adjusted the blanket around it, as though the motion itself required care. There was something devastating in the simplicity of that. A man who had probably signed deployment orders and casualty notices with less visible effort, now treating one corner of a blanket like sacred work. Claire felt a pull in her chest she had trained herself for years not to indulge. Field medicine teaches you to love competence more than outcome, because outcome is too often cruel. But some rooms get through anyway. Eli woke again close to dusk. This time there was less panic in it. His eyes opened slowly, blinked once against the light, then found the room in pieces. The monitor, the ceiling, Claire, his father. He swallowed, winced, and looked toward the Nathan. Nathan was already leaning close. "You're all right," he said. Eli's mouth moved. No sound came on the first attempt. Claire poured a small amount of water onto a sponge swab and moistened his lips again. "Do not force the voice," she said. "One breath first." He obeyed. The breath was shaky, but he took it. Then, in a thread of sound that barely held together, he said, "Dad." Nathan closed his eyes. It was only for a second. Just enough for the rest of the room to understand they were witnessing something private inside something clinical. When he opened them again, they were wet. "I'm here," he said. Eli looked at him as if trying to fit 6 months of absence into one instant and finding the math impossible. His gaze slipped to Claire next. Recognition moved through his expression. Weak, incomplete. "But there, you," he whispered. Claire did not let herself smile too quickly. Sudden emotion can startle the newly returned. "Yes," she said. His eyes narrowed with effort. Voice. She understood. "I know." Nathan looked between them, then back to Eli. "You heard her." Eli's gaze drifted, searching for the shape of memory. In the dark, Claire held still. For a moment, she was not in Colorado anymore. Not under soft hospital lighting and expensive silence. She was back beneath a rotor-wash sky in Helmand, one hand on a shattered Marine's collar, ordering life into a body that wanted to leave. Memory is a dangerous thing when it returns too quickly. She kept her face calm and gave Eli something simpler to hold. "You heard enough," she said. "That was the point." A weak line appeared at the edge of his mouth. Not a full smile. More the body's attempt at one. It vanished almost immediately under fatigue, but Nathan saw it, and the change in him was unmistakable. Hope no longer looked like defiance in his face. It looked like recognition. Maya re-entered with the final review note from imaging and passed it to Vance, who had returned to the unit. He read in silence, then handed the sheet to Halpern. "Early recovery pattern is consistent with preserved but suppressed function," he said quietly. "Extremely rare, but consistent." Nathan looked up. "Say that plainly." Vance met his eyes. "Your son was not gone." The words entered the room and stayed there. No one rushed to dress them up. No one apologized with speeches. No one tried to make language redeem 6 months of wrongness. The truth was enough, and it was not enough, and everyone in the room understood that both could be true at once. Nathan stood from the chair and walked around the bed toward Claire. She straightened instinctively as though a superior officer had approached, but Nathan stopped a few feet from her and simply looked at her in the clear light of what had happened. "You gave me my son back," he said. Claire shook her head before the sentence could settle on her. "No," she said. "He found his way back." Nathan's voice dropped. "Because you knew how to call him." The room went quiet. Claire had no prepared answer for gratitude. It was easier in war. You stabilize, you move, you lose people, you save people. Then you go on to the next casualty because the next casualty is already arriving. Civilian hospitals leave more space for words, and words can be harder than blood. So she chose the simplest truth available. "I recognize the fight," she said. Nathan gave one slow nod. It carried more meaning than praise would have. Recognition from one professional to another. One soldier of a different kind to one who had stood a post no one else understood. He turned back toward Eli before anything in the room could become sentimental. That restraint was a kind of mercy. Night came fully after that. Colorado Springs outside the high window dissolved into scattered lights and dark mountain lines. The wing quieted. A few routine alarms sounded from distant rooms and were silenced. Nurses at the far station lowered their voices without being told. The world continued in the ordinary way it always does, even when one room in one building has just watched a certainty collapse. Nathan made a call from the corner of the room while Eli slept. He kept his voice low, but the language carried. "This is Crow. I want military criminal investigations and legal attached to this before midnight. No delegation. Direct line only. My son is awake. No one accesses his records without my authorization. No one." He listened, jaw set, then added yes. The crash file, the network appendix, all of it. He ended the call and looked at the dark screen of his phone for a moment before putting it away. Claire did not ask whom he had reached. She already knew the type of call. It was not a father's call, it was a general's, and there was iron in it now. Yet when he returned to the bedside and touched Eli's hand again, all of that hardness changed shape. The father came back first. Eli slept for nearly an hour. His breathing eased with each cycle. The fear lines in his face softened. Once he stirred and Claire stepped in automatically to reorient him, but he settled as soon as Nathan said his name. Close to 10 o'clock, Claire finished the last of her charting. Observed spontaneous eye-opening. Extubation tolerated. Verbal output limited but meaningful. Patient identified father and recognized prior auditory stimulus. Patient's statement contradicts reported mechanical cause of crash. The final line sat on the screen with a weight none of the earlier entries carried. Clinical documentation had become witness. Halpern reviewed it and approved it without alteration. That mattered too. When Claire closed the chart, she became aware all at once of how tired she was. Not physically alone. There is a special fatigue that follows prolonged vigilance after the danger has changed form, but not fully passed. The body does not know where to put its adrenaline once the room gets quiet. She stepped to the bedside one final time before leaving. Nathan looked up. "You're going. My shift ended a while ago." He glanced toward the dark hallway beyond the glass. "I can have them keep your access on this room." Claire almost smiled. "I think the hospital can manage that without orders from a general." A faint, tired warmth passed through Nathan's face. It suited him better than grief. He looked down at Eli, then back to her. "I never asked why you left the service." Claire rested one hand lightly on the bed rail for a moment. "Most people don't." Nathan waited. The room did not require the whole story, only enough truth to honor the shape of the day. "I got good at bringing people back," she said. "I did not get as good at staying where I learned it." Nathan understood. Again, no further explanation was needed. His gaze moved to Eli. "Today I'm glad you carried it with you anyway." Claire looked at the boy in the bed, at the oxygen line, the settling pulse, the brow no longer locked in fear, the life still fragile, still incomplete, but undeniably present. "So am I," she said. She turned toward the door. "Nurse Bennett." Nathan's voice stopped her halfway there. She looked back. Not sir now, not general, not even Claire, just the name the hospital knew. There was a kind of respect in that. "Why didn't you tell any of them who you were?" he asked. Claire considered the question. "Because names from old wars do not help when a room is listening to the wrong machine. Because people often trust titles more than observation, and she had learned long ago that the body does not care about rank. Because if she had led with Afghanistan, half the staff would have heard story before data. Instead, she said, in places like this, what you notice matters more than what you've done." Nathan held her gaze for a second, then nodded once. "Yes," he said, "it does." Claire left the room after that with the same quiet she had entered it in that morning. No ceremony. No applause. Just a nurse stepping back into a corridor full of other rooms, other monitors, other human beings balanced on thresholds of their own. Behind her, ICU 7 no longer felt like a mausoleum financed by expensive machines and prolonged grief. It felt like a room where a boy had come back to his father, where medicine had been forced to correct itself, and where silence had stopped pretending it meant surrender. Inside, Nathan resumed his place in the bedside chair, only now he was not keeping watch over someone the world had nearly pronounced absent. He was standing post over a son who had fought his way through darkness and found one small line back to the living. Eli stirred once in his sleep, and Nathan leaned close at once, the response of a man whose nervous system had relearned hope too quickly to trust it yet. "I'm here," he said. The words were softer now. No command in them, no order, just promise. Eli's breathing eased again. Outside the window, the city lights of Colorado Springs spread beneath the mountain dark. Cars moved along distant roads, ordinary lives continuing under winter sky. Somewhere beyond those lights, files still existed, records still waited, and truths still carried other names. But inside the room, for this one night, none of that outranked the simple fact of breath. The monitor kept steady time. The oxygen flowed. Nathan sat with one hand over his son's, and for the first time in 6 months, nothing in that room sounded like goodbye.